I'd like to raise everyone's in the bottom half wages.
That's a very interesting proposal. And why so?
There are too many people who don't have the means to live or sustain their life or sustain their children's life. Sustain is a broad concept, and it can mean much more than just bare food. I like the capabilities approach developed by Martha Nussbaum, who's one of my professors, and Amartya Sen, that goes well beyond bare necessities. But I do think the material conditions of our lives has a big impact on our capacity to participate in our societies and to fight for ourselves.
Linda Martin Alcoff is professor of philosophy at the City University of New York. She has written books and articles on a wide range of topics, including continental philosophy, feminism, and critical race theory. She has recently written a book about rape and resistance in 2018, and before that, The Future of Whiteness in 2015, and even before that, Visible Identities, Race, Gender, and the Self. In this episode, we talk more generally about relations of power, inequalities, and oppression. I'd like to thank a lot Linda for this eye-opening conversation we had, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Why do you care about other people and trying to make their lives better and to give them more influence?
Well, we have this ideology or mythology in the United States about the American dream and about the idea that if you work hard, you will make more money. And people who do not work hard and are lazy make less money. And my mother's family was pretty poor, and I grew up living with them and knowing them very well. And I grew up from modest economic background myself, and I learned when I was 12 years old, visiting some of my family in South Carolina who were sharecroppers. These were poor white people, by the way. On my mother's side, I'm white. That the harder you work, the less money you make. The people worked very, very hard and had no floors in their houses. Their houses had dirt floors and, really inadequate conditions of life. So many people who work very, very hard, building everything that we rely upon, providing the services, providing the food and medicine that everybody relies upon, don't make enough to sustain their own lives. So I knew this from a child. I hadn't read Marx, hadn't the language to explain what I was seeing. But I have come to see that most people know this, maybe not in the academy, but because most people do these kinds of jobs, and they know that they're paid too little. They may believe that the capitalists are smarter, that capitalists love to promote that belief. But they know that they're paid too little and not really respected for the importance and value of the work that they do.
And if you had a different childhood, you think, let's say less modest childhood, you think you would have been able to see that, or you think you need to get this experience to actually understand the problem?
Well, that's a counterfactual, what we call in philosophy. Imagine what is not true and then figure out what would follow from that. And I hate counterfactuals.
I've asked the wrong question.
I think what's different is when you do learn some of these things as a child, you think about them for a longer period of time. You don't suddenly realize them by reading something in college or in your 40s or whatever. So there's a longer period of gestation of your thinking about this problem and why it exists and what its parameters are. that does make a difference.
Because if I ask this question, it's because obviously now, I mean, if it doesn't, if lower salary doesn't get increased, it's because people have there is some upper part of salary and they don't want to increase they are the ones who decide to give more power, at least for the moment. Maybe that could hopefully change, but so my question is why these people don't want to give a higher salary to the second part of the population?
I think there's at least two reasons. One is self-interest, obviously, and self-concern. But the other reason is there's a lot of bad ideas out in the world about how people who engage in manual labor are a little more than animals. It doesn't require intelligence. In the United States, the government used to provide a ranking system of different kinds of work so that you could figure out what was just wages based on complexity, intellectual difficulty, and so forth. And they used to rate childcare workers with a lower number of complexity and intellectual difficulty than parking lot attendants. I have nothing against parking lot attendants. I think it's a difficult work. Those people really know how to drive and park. But childcare workers who have, 15 3-year-olds to take care of each day, it takes every bit of your brain that any CEO uses. So we have ingested false ideas about the difficulty and complexity of work, and thus the idea that a just wage reflects difficulty and complexity. And the work of women, the work of many manual laborers, the work of rural farmers, the work of people who don't have formal training or formal expertise, but know how to grow anything. My grandmother could cook anything that came into the yard. So any kind of animal that wandered into the yard, she knew how to cook. She was semi-literate, but there's an enormous amount of knowledge that people have, and it's complex knowledge, and it's passed through generations and should be remunerated. So I think that's part of the reason why the wages are considered justifiably low for all these people.
So it's a very difficult question, but for you, what's a just salary? Should it be based on something, on some criteria? For instance, complexity indeed, but then understanding that complexity is not what we think of. Intellectual profession is not necessarily more complex than other professions. Or should it be based on other criteria? What's just salary mean?
Well, in the United States, we use the concept of the living wage. And so many workers demand wages based on a living wage. So that takes into account how much does housing cost in my community, how much does food cost in my community, realistically, how much does education cost in my community. And I think that's a very good way to do it, rather than looking at necessarily the kind of work, because you still need to think about the actual cost of living in a particular place at a particular time.
Do you think there's a way to make a change in that, like to actually shift, so either make people less self-interested or to change the perception of people on that?
Yes, we have to do that, but I think at bottom it is a question of power. Despite all of these ideological mystifications and mythologies, at bottom it's a question of power, because those who are really powerful help to spread the mythologies and control the media in so many ways. And there we really do have the advantage. I mean, there's no reason, I think, to be completely pessimistic, because we have the numbers. by far.
Mm.
The number of billionaires in the world is a relatively small number with inordinate, incredible power. But I am not at all pessimistic.
If we have the numbers, we are more than 50%. It's a democracy where the 50% majority is supposed to win. How come it's not happening? How come it's not changing?
Yeah. I don't think we really have democracies in the West. Certainly not in my country, in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, and in fact, the electoral system sometimes does more harm than good because it gives the illusion of democratic decision making. So we are given a choice between two bad choices. And my entire life, I have voted against the worst of those two choices. And very rarely had somebody that I wanted to vote for genuinely. And how does that happen? I mean, many political theorists, sociologists can tell you exactly how the structures of the electoral machine are built in such a way to control who are the candidates and which candidates are, pushed out entirely. And this happens all over the world in many ways, sometimes in different ways in different countries, but it gives us a very terribly reduced set of choices. So to call this democracy is really doing a disservice to the concept of democracy.
So you mean that we don't really have a real democracy where the majority of people, it doesn't even need to be majority, but where like the people would have the power. But what we have is a flawed system where, because of its organization and how it's built and the candidates that emerge from that machinery, the result is that we are given with two bad choices instead of a better choice.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Instead of these two bad candidates or two bad choice that we can vote between, what would you aspire for?
Well, there are many different methods now being discussed and some being practiced to try to improve democracy. One is to change the financing of elections and the ability for corporate power to determine who has television advertisements and who has good television advertisements and who becomes recognizable and familiar to an electorate. That's one thing. The other thing that's talked about sometimes is the length of the elections. Like in the United States, we have 2 years of elections. And in some places, they shorten the time so that you can actually have more focus on actual policies. And then other things like your own suggestion about progress talks and ways to conduct public discourse around candidates in a more meaningful way, so that it's based on substance and substantive policy rather than mudslinging and somebody's illicit affair with somebody. Who cares? These, to talk about to impeach Trump on the grounds of his affair with a woman who was a sex worker is like impeaching President Nixon for Watergate rather than the bombing of Cambodia. My generation thinks, a lot of us. Who cares what happens in private life? I mean, that's an issue for Trump's wife. That's an issue for Trump's private life. But why does this take up so much airtime in the television? Because the television itself is a business that has to have viewers. It has to bring viewers in. So corporate sponsored television is driven not by their own, bad moral behavior, but by the business model that they have to work under. So we try to have some non-corporate media. Like in the United States, we have a television show called Democracy Now!, which I encourage everybody to watch every day. It's available around the world. It's an hour-long show, and it's entirely free of all advertising and corporate influences. And there's, of course, a lot of alternative media that is like that.
You said that you're optimistic, people can do something about it. What do you think? So, for instance, a person who is watching or listening to this podcast, what do you think at their individual level? Do they have a possibility to do something? Since you say it's also about power ultimately, do you think they can do something? What would you recommend? Maybe watching, informing themselves with this alternative media?
Yes, two things I'd say. One is to find some non-corporate media. And of course, there's non-corporate media can come in with all kinds of political guises. Sometimes you have to be careful. It may present itself as non-corporate, but it may have some corporate backing in the background. So you have to do some investigation to try to find alternative media so that you get your sources of information from a variety of sources and from better sources, from real journalists, you know. The other thing is, I think the social movements in our times have been able to make changes. When I was growing up in the United States, the civil rights movement was very strong, and it became the Black Power movement, also the movement against the Vietnam War. They had a lot of successes, not as many successes as we would like, but they changed the culture and changed the institutions in significant ways. And what happens now, I think, is the power structure tries to accept those changes in the most in a way that contains them and makes them as small as possible, but still it has to accept those changes to some extent. So I think the social movements today, take your pick, there's many you can choose from, are the ones that come up with new concepts, new arguments, new language, goals. And this is where democracy actually happens best. Sometimes they fail, sometimes they're put in prison, sometimes they, like Occupy Wall Street is an example that emerged in my own city, New York City, in 2011. And Occupy Wall Street has not changed Wall Street, but it changed the conversation about money and the finance capital. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the long-term impact of social movements on ideas and concepts that people have available to them, and people's also, you know, what's amazing when you are involved in a movement and there's people coming who've never gone to a demonstration, and they feel such a sense of agency and of power that they've never felt in their lives before. And that's very powerful too. Beyond the concepts and the ideas is the sense that you can take over a building, that you can have an impact on the local news, that you can have an impact on political policy. And that's just as important as anything else in social movements.
Yeah, that's big indeed. Like when you made the list of all the social movements that had an impact, indeed we can see it had a deep transformation as a result. So I'm gonna make a bit of a stretch, but you've published a book, like you were saying, and do you think that this problematic and how the system is structured and how all this system of power is happening in, for instance, in the US, has consequences in the rest of the world? And how do you maybe connect that?
Well, if I understand the question, I do think the United States is the most dangerous country in the world. And so when we have a danger of fascism increasing and developing in the United States, unfortunately, it will have more of an impact because of our military power, which we use unilaterally, and it's been shown that the United States government is not concerned about the International Criminal Court or the international community's opinion of what they do. So I think it's dangerous for two reasons. One is because we have so much military power, and two, because we don't care what the rest of the world thinks. So it's of great concern. And the financial markets, the flows of resources that puts a country, various countries into terrible debt that then causes their own civil wars. So many of the conflagrations that are happening in the world today, in Sudan and Congo, among others, and certainly Israel-Palestine, can be traced back to the inordinate power of the United States financially and politically, or the world financial markets in general, the controlled debt.
So if the US is the most dangerous country, and I can get that because indeed it's probably, the most influential one, do you say that it also comes with a higher responsibility for people who live in the USA?
I think that, yes. I think that we have a responsibility to understand the effects of our actions. There's a lot of talk about this with climate change. You should stop using plastics, and you should compost, and you should do this and do that as an individual. And as if this is going to change the way that green energy is produced or conversations. And I think we have to engage in more collective efforts to make more substantive change with the dynamics of power in our societies. And as I'm an immigrant to the United States. I was born in Panama and came to the United States as a small child, but I'm a U.S. citizen, and I do think I have a responsibility to struggle to make the United States less bad.
And so for that, do you think that the new generation, which is much more globalized, so even, social media, for instance, could play an important and new, and do you have hopes in the social media playing the role for social activism that you say is better? The more collective it is, the better it is?
Well, social media has proven to be a double-edged sword, so it has equal parts great positive opportunity and tremendous capacity for spreading false information and for organizing among the fascists. Now there's this discussion of the new global right, that the far right in Europe and the far right in North America, and also there's a far right in Latin America, are bouncing off each other and getting ideas from each other and gaining strength from each other. It's kind of a wave. So they're using social media quite effectively to promote the ties and the connections and the strength of far-right ideas about how to maintain our material well-being, certain people's material well-being.
So at the end, from what you say, I understand that the fight that is happening, the fight of power that is happening, for instance, at the level of the US, is actually being transported at another level or in another place, which is the social media, where this is why there is the double sword, because just like in the US, we could change the things for the best or change the things for the worst. The same in the social media, right?
Yes, it can go both ways.
Yeah.
And I think also with artificial intelligence, the problem is not artificial intelligence by itself, but artificial intelligence certainly isn't a guaranteed solution to our problems. Right now it's under corporate power, and that's the problem with AI. So I think as long as AI is wielded by profit motivated corporations and current governments, it is unlikely to produce good outcomes for the masses of people.
Yeah, OpenAI is at the beginning started as a non-profit, then it's shifted to like a limited profit, or maybe it was always the case. And this you are already prudent about that. I mean, you're saying it's already at the hands of corporate in this case.
Yes.
Okay.
There's some good work by, on this topic around AI, and Yanis Varoufakis's Techno-Feudalism book is useful here. So a lot of people are doing good analyses of it, of a kind of the way in which new forms of wage slavery and oppression are being fashioned with these new technological means, so that we're all dependent upon and beholden to those who control the technology that we need in our lives.
And so it's the beginning of a very important new era in the era of artificial intelligence. And like you say, it's a crucial moment to make sure that artificial intelligence is not used for the worst. In that case, because for me it's always hard with this to see how we could make a change. Again, that would be through social activism, get the source of information we get, but also through social activism.
And government regulation. We need heavy regulations on this technology that is produced by deliberative democratic means. So the technological companies claim that they have the expertise to know how to wield and develop this new possibilities, and their internal mechanisms of control are sufficient for ethical oversight on their developments of this. And of course, that's not true. It's been shown already not to be true, and AI is relatively recent. So there needs to be a open oversight that is true, that comes from outside these corporations, to engage in oversight over what they are doing and what they are developing, and that itself is produced under conditions of, as much of a measure of real democracy as we can develop.
What's fascinating for me, I mean, since we started, I see that on many topics, like let's say all topics, you really feel passionate about that, like that there is something to be changed, and we need to do something, and you are very optimistic when many people could also think this is too much and we can just give up on everything. And I'm still trying to understand. So back to my first question, like, why do you care, let's say, about that? Also because now, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to assume your personal situation, but I don't think we are in the worst situation, let's say. Being here in university is already a great luxury, let's say. And so what gives you so much motivation and decided that absolutely, we need to do something, because we cannot, I mean, you could stay with your comfort and just do nothing about that, like.
Well, especially as old as I am, I could, feel like climate change is not going to affect me, but climate change is already happening. So I think the middle classes of the world are being idiotic if they think that they can remain immune from these different forces that we've been discussing here. As I think I mentioned maybe before we started this, there was a dictatorship in Panama for 20 years. My father had an advanced degree from the London School of Economics, and he was teaching at the University of Panama. He lost his job. This has happened many times in Europe and in Latin America, and it's happening now in the United States. Our excellent higher educational system, excellent in some ways anyway, in both the United States and in Europe, are under threat. And in fact, it's already happening. There were 123 redundancies at Goldsmiths when I was there 2 months ago. People were losing their jobs. It didn't matter how many books they published, how much their work was recognized within peer-reviewed journals or by academic presses. The humanities is under assault. We can't take any of this for granted. We cannot take the continuance of a strong educational system at the university level for granted. I think the fascists know, they're very smart, they know what they're doing. To undermine the humanities in particular in university education is to undermine social criticism and analysis, and to disempower the next generation to understand what is going on and what can be done about it. So I think if you stick your head in the sand, you may well find yourself buried under pretty soon.
I totally understand you. I understand we cannot get things for granted, and this is where you find this importance and urgency that you feel to stay vigilant and do more about that. Maybe one last question that I have is, when we think about these people who are in the highest sphere, and like you say, maybe they know what they're doing, maybe by reducing critical voices and so on, they maintain their power. How much intention do you give to them? Because personally, I wouldn't think that they do that even maybe consciously so much, or maybe they know that it's their advantage, okay, maybe, but they are not according to me, I give them less intention than I have the impression you give to them. Maybe they are not aware of all the problems and the suffering that it causes to other population, and this is why they just go on, because they think it's for the good. But maybe I'm being naive. Like, how much intention do you give to them?
Well, one question is what follows from that. Who cares about their intentions? We're looking at their actions. But Karl Marx, of course, says that the problem is not the morality of the boss. The boss has to do what the boss does. Keep wages low, get rid of people who develop a disability, even if the disability is caused by the work that they're doing because of their cost, and do all of these morally noxious things because that's what they're being paid to do. So it is in their role as the CEO of the capitalist corporation that they're doing evil, not because they're intending and wanting to do evil. So they could change their ideas, their morality, but if they're going to keep their job, they have to continue what they're doing. There have been some famous examples of multimillionaires and billionaires that have had a change of heart and have actually tried to use their power and money to do good, give most of it away, and so forth. Those are the exceptions, of course, not the rule. But I don't think it's a. But why, in God's name, should we trust this very small group of multi-billionaires has inordinate power in the world? They have inordinate power over climate change. The climate change conversation has devolved in the last couple of decades into a conversation about profit-making forms of mediation of climate change. That's, if you go to the big climate change conferences, it's full of corporations trying to figure out how to make a buck out of helping people survive climate change, more than really doing what we need to do to slow it down and to stop it and to really address the terrible disparities of it. So why, I don't even care what their morality is. It's the system of giving such people such inordinate power, so that if you do have somebody who's insane like Elon Musk and thinks that he's going to set up a colony on Mars, that he can live and have life forever, they can do so much damage because they are a particular crazy individual, but many of them are not crazy individuals. But that's not the problem. The problem is the structure of differential power.
Thank you very much. I had another question, but this is such a good ending. I mean, I like so much this last answer that I'm just gonna keep it like this and ask you the question later. So thank you again very much, and bye bye. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks to all of you for listening this episode, and see you for the next episode every first of the month.